Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are watching SYS-CON TV. Here we are with our first ever power panel, in fact. We're going to be looking at SOA and web services today with four very distinguished guests. I want to say welcome to David Kershaw, Professional Services Manager and Professional and Education Services for Altoba, correct, David?
Yes, thanks very much, Jimmy.
We have Aaron White, a software architect with Mindreef. Welcome, Aaron, to the first ever power panel.
Thank you.
And good friends, Paul Lipton, Senior Architect, Web Services and Application Management Team for Computer Associates.
Well, thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you for joining us, Paul. And last, but absolutely not least, Eric Newcomer, CTO of Iona Technologies. Eric, thank you.
Thank you.
For joining us. Web Services, the theme before us. I want to just throw out to you guys really this notion of, is it profitable to be thinking about this space in terms of just thinking of web services? Is that really what this move towards SOA is about? That it's just not so much implementing web services, let's just get to thinking in services. Eric, I know you've thought about this quite a lot and spoken about it a lot.
Absolutely. I think that maybe the biggest thing in the change here that we're talking about is it's a new way of thinking about IT. You have to think about your systems overall in the organization. You have to think about the design primarily before you even start to think about such things as standards, technologies, and products. You have to think about how you create reusable services instead of standalone programs or discrete applications. You have to do the design and the architecture before you even think about the implementation. And this is a complete change from how we've been doing things, but I think it's very welcome and necessary change.
And when you say we, you're saying that we've got to get architects to think differently.
Well, I mean architects, I mean IT managers, I mean CIOs, I mean CEOs, thinking about the IT assets of an organization differently and how they're brought to bear to solve business problems is something we can think about differently now that we have services and service orientation compared to technologies of the past, or I should say approaches of the past, because service-oriented architecture is an approach, not a technology, and that can't be said enough.
So a senior architect has to give a view on that, Paul, right?
Well, I usually have half a dozen or so, Jeremy. Without a doubt, there's been a huge change in the thinking of organizations around the importance of service-oriented architectures, but we still have a long way to go. Some of the changes that have to be made are organizational. The way development is done today, development projects are incented and directed towards reducing cost and reducing time to delivery. But in order to think in good service-oriented principles, sometimes it's necessary to think a little bit about the good of the overall organization. What can we do to create a service that's reusable and can benefit more than the particular point project that I'm involved in? Now this, in order to create that kind of dedication, that kind of attitude towards the development of services, a lot of things have to change. The incentives within the development organization have to change. Developers have to be paid to think about the ramifications of their services outside of their own problem domain. And right now, many IT organizations are challenged to face some of those organizational changes. And there are also changes just in terms of thinking. How do we think about the applications we build? In service-oriented architectures, there's a lot of visibility. Those services are sometimes visible not just within the enterprise, but outside the enterprise. So then the question becomes, before we deploy these services, how do we manage these services? How do we secure these services? Before we deploy them, we better make sure we have our ducks lined up and we understand the ramifications and the risks involved in that deployment.
All right, so you're still, at the 37,000 to 47,000 foot view. I want to bring in Aaron White. Aaron, I think of you as being more a down and dirty guy in the trenches. Well, what do you make of these guys? It's a little highfalutin, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I would agree that when you're talking about SOA and services, you have to. It is a reframing of how you've done things previously, and it is a new way of thinking, new way of deploying, new way of managing. All that, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, if an organization is really going to understand what sort of benefits what SOA architecture, web services is going to have for them, they've got to start a project. You have to get out there, you have to build one, deploy one, and get your feet wet a little bit to really understand how it's going to fit into to what you'd like to get from it. So yes, you do need to understand at a high level what's going on, but you also need to sort of get in there and try it out and see what it can do for you.
David, where would you sit in that? Where would Altoba sit in that cosmos?
Well, Altoba's not specifically in the SOA marketplace. Our tools touch on a broad variety of different activities. I would say that we think in terms of lately quite a bit about governance, because that's what people are asking us to help them do within their service-oriented architecture initiatives. And that kind of brings up an interesting point that it is an organizational change, as I think you said, Paul, but it's also it's something that you do want to have your developers actually thinking different, but you also don't want them to have to think too much, because you can't sort of assume that every developer is going to have the same level of understanding for the big picture. And so I think the organization has to provide quite a bit of support for people and have a way to validate whether the architecture is being adhered to, and whether the proper precautions are going to be taken, and are we going on the right path. Now, David hit the nail. I'm sorry, Eric. David hit the nail right on the head there. Organizations really, you can't put too much enterprise scale decision making in the hands of the development organization, in particular individual developers. There are very, very powerful tools out there that can help developers be very, very productive, and those tools are wonderful and important. But it's also important that the higher level enterprise priorities are in the control of senior management, IT, line of business managers, and some of those areas, are policy, security, service levels, quality of service. Those pertain to business relationships and business expectations. So you need mechanisms in place that allow enterprise decision makers to make enterprise decisions, not at the application, not at the code level, but at the decision maker level, and then you need good tools to complement that, of course, and to help build those applications more appropriately. I would say at the code level also. I mean, certainly every development organization has development practices, and those practices are important. They have principles. Those principles guide specific decision making at many points during the day, and I think that's also a very important thing.
But again, this goes back, absolutely. It goes back to the point we were making earlier about how you think differently. Now you have to divide things up. Perhaps we can talk a little bit about division of labor, which is an industrial term, in terms of characterizing the change in thinking. The thinking has to be done the correct way at the organizational level, at the management level, as well as at the developer level. And it's quite correct that developers shouldn't have to worry about the overall issues. You need to have an enterprise architect who understands the architecture and how to divide the problem up so developers can work on their pieces. But again, it's a different way compared to how we've been building applications, which had been to take a set of requirements or a specification for a project and build it sort of as a bespoke activity, isolated perhaps from other activities. And now we have to think about what developers are doing in the context of larger scheme of things, and hopefully get to the point where developers are creating pieces, reusable services that can be assembled or composed into larger things more quickly and with more scientific and industrial methods, perhaps leading to this kind of assembly line analogy for IT.
Well, that's actually interesting, Eric, because I think the upside of the technical side of this, is it a technology? Is it a way of thinking? The upside on the new technology and the new quotes capital W capital S web services, I would say, is the possible repeatability, where before you might not have as much control at an organizational level. You have little bits of code here, there, and yonder. Now you have assets that can be easily checked in a sort of broad marketplace. And I think, my 2 cents, I think that's a bit of a benefit.
Absolutely. I think that's what this change is really all about, is trying to get IT to a place where it can serve business better by having more predictable results from projects, such as you have in other areas of the world, other industries. Software remains really a craft business, relying on the skills of individuals to put things together today. And we need to find ways, techniques, and technologies, tools, ways of thinking, ways of organization to get to a place where we can create software applications more predictably, more quickly and with predictable results. There's too many failures today, also is another way of saying what the problem is.
This really goes back to the traditional architectural concepts of separation of concerns. It's very important to have the enterprise architects involved in the design of service-oriented applications at the earliest possible stage, along with other concerns, operational concerns. We've all seen too many cases where a small elite architectural group will push a service-oriented agenda without full participation from operations staff, other development organizations, and all that. And yet, at the organizational level, again, just to sort of pop the stack back up to the original proposition that I made earlier, at the organizational level, if you don't manage to get that full buy-in and that full perspective from all the parties involved, then a lot of service-oriented architecture efforts will fail. So it's important really to have a multi-level initiative and buy-in and support at both the executive level, the development level, and at all these different levels in the enterprise. And that's a very hard thing to accomplish, but it's absolutely necessary.
Paul, be careful so we don't talk so broad that no company is going to be able to get out there and actually have a successful SOA initiative. I fully agree with most of what's being said here, but at some point the organization needs to get in there and build the knowledge so that they do know how to go about building, deploying, testing web services, what they need to watch out for, what are the pitfalls. They need that organizational experience.
The French say the best is the enemy of the good.
Right.
Things don't get begun because it's got to be.
And I'm not advocating at all a waterfall approach to development. I think it's important that you get your hands dirty, that you have real-world experiences. No way that you can become proficient in any new technology or architectural approach if you don't get your hands dirty.
But I think we're talking about two different things here. I mean, you mentioned operations, and I would say architecture is all about being able to think operationally. How is what I do going to work when it gets into production? And I think what you're saying is very valid also, Aaron, but you're talking about a different thing in a way. You're saying how you're going to learn so you can know the parameters that you're then going to use to inform your decisions that are going to affect how operations happen.
Well, I think you guys are both right. It's another saying is think global, act local.
Right.
You need to have the bigger picture, but you also, when you do something small, you want to have the bigger picture in mind so that you know when you create something.
Yeah, the
project.
The message I'm trying to get across is that we have a lot of customers now who are actually in there doing things, and it's not necessarily an organizational-wide movement at the moment. Though they see the transformational benefits, they want to get there, but they've gone in and done things successfully. And so, not to scare people away. I mean, we all know sort of what benefits can come from this, but
everything starts small, basically.
Everything starts small. It's going to be grassroots at some level.
Yeah. So let's just change gears a little, if I may, because now we have experts here, and we've got people viewing this from wherever they are in the world, thinking, well, let's use these guys to help do some of the thinking work I haven't got time for. Let's try and unpack the difference between SOA. Let's contradistinguish SOA and web services for once and for all. I just want to try a little thing on you. We all know that web services, the term is given credit to Philip Greenspun. I had a little exchange with him prior to this broadcast, and one of the things he said was he coined the term, but never to mean what web services currently means. This is actually what he said. He said, what I meant by a web service was what I might today call a web application, i.e. a website that does the job formerly done by a desktop app. The Microsoft .NET style web services we just call web-based distributed computing. So here's what he says. He says that web services used in this way is a complete misnomer. And I quote, I personally think something incorporating the standard 1960s and 1970s term distributed computing is the right one. Web services doesn't fit. Much or most of this stuff will eventually be happening on the internet, but without what most people think of as the web. So users won't be doing in HTML, though probably HTTP will be used. So technically it could be called web. Question for you guys then is web services a misnomer?
Oh, it's beyond a misnomer. It's really it's an unfortunate term that we're saddled with today.
We can't do anything about this?
We can't do anything about this now, I think.
The horse is out of the barn.
The horse is out of the barn. But what we can do is we can understand as professionals the true ramifications and potential of the technology. It's not about HTTP alone. It's not about web applications, but what it is about is the potential to automate business relationships that couldn't be successfully automated before. And this has, one of the challenges we have in IT is relating what we do and the value of our organization to the value of the rest of the enterprise. There are too many CEOs out there that have read articles from, certain scholarly journals that question the value of IT, and very often the wrong response is for IT to sort of huddle together and say, we're not going to deal with this. That's just academic. But we can actually, I think, with service-oriented architectures and web services technologies, we have a golden opportunity to actually demonstrate the value of IT in not just in reducing cost, which is the traditional thing IT has been asked to do, but more importantly, in providing new above-the-line business opportunities that haven't existed before, opportunities to interoperate with partners and suppliers and customers and even regulators in a low-cost fashion, and bring these solutions to market in a more agile and adaptable way.
Two questions, Eric. You're a kind of historian among us. One, has there ever been an example where technology has begotten a name that has been so kind of orthogonal to what it's really about? Second one is, if you're saying web services is here forever, it is so incredibly dull a term. Are you absolutely certain you're not going to do anything about that at all? You're just going to get it live there?
Lay all this on Eric.
I'll lay it on Eric, and then I'm sure that the rest of you will help him out.
Well, there's many examples of that over time, Jeremy. Actually, one of the more famous ones, SYS. Does everyone know what that stands
Very
for?
good, very good.
Customer Information Control System. What does that have to do with what the technology is used for? We had one at Digital when I was working there, Application Control and Management System with a TP monitor. Tuxedo, what is that?
You see, you just set him going and he just can tell you.
I thought of another funny one from, I don't know how relevant it is, but Coca-Cola itself is not based on cocaine anymore, but the name is
we still dial the telephone and it goes on.
Get a little
and this thing, though, Jeremy, to be a little more serious, we had a long debate about this. I spent 2 years on the Web Services Architecture Working Group at W3C,
right,
which is maybe what you're referring to, and we debated this endlessly, and it it hampered our efforts to some extent because it brought the people into the committee thinking that web services were all about the web more than about distributed computing. And I think that's right. There is an issue there. But I also believe that there's something very positive about it, because I like to say that web services are bringing the lessons that we've learned on the web into IT. And the lessons in particular that are important are the widespread interoperability and portability and the platform independence that the web has achieved on a global scale. And we need the same for
What about
for
ease
IT.
of use?
Ease of use as well.
Ease of development.
So you're trying to take that's a good way. So the positive spin is, look, this is...
Well, I've been working in distributed computing for a long time. I'll just, make one further point here, then open it up a little bit. When web services first came out, it was indeed something coming from another direction. Distributed computing has evolved from Apollo RPC, Digital RPC, DCE, RPC, Corba, J2EE, DCOM. You can sort of trace an evolution of the concepts and technologies in that path. And XML, which is the base of web services, came from a completely different technology path, starting with HTML, text markup languages, HTML. XML was designed as an HTML replacement. And it's come in and merged with these distributed computing technologies. And I like to keep a focus on that a little bit, because especially the traditional distributed computing guys like myself have difficulty adjusting to the difference that XML makes when it comes in from this different world. And I think it's important that we keep that in mind.
Yeah, not
okay, well, just one moment. I think we all need at least a 21-second break after Eric has come to us with all that history. We'll be right back. Well, we managed to digest some of it. So, David, what do you make of that? That's like, Eric, a riff on IT history there.
It's a wonderful riff. I was just actually just musing on the history of .NET markup languages and the very large difference.
You were musing on that as you walked along?
No, just now. I just said that history is fantastic, and it's very, very different from the idea of distributed computing and the strongly typed interaction between services that you were primarily pointing to. to hop from one technology to the other is a huge challenge, and and we see that. My company sees that quite a bit as folks come out of that document-oriented world, or they come out of some of the early XML technologies that were less strongly typed and try and pick up with the XML schema that's integral to getting involved with.
Equal troubles on that side for the document-oriented crowd to adjust to distributed computing concepts.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And there have been other important trends as well. I mean, clearly one of the issues is just that as we've renewed our interest in service-oriented architectures, which go back to the 1980s. I mean, distributed computing environment. Not that I want to make myself the grandfather of IT quite as much as Eric is, but
who settled me with that?
Yeah, I'm afraid you're stuck with it now. But I mean, we have learned some lessons, and it's interesting to see how the focus has changed even in among SOA architects between sort of an RPC-centric view as we've gone to more of an asynchronous messaging paradigm, as we've learned some more valuable lessons about granularity of services and just how loosely coupled a service needs to be effective, because it's not black and white. Services are not tightly coupled or loosely coupled magically in a binary way. There are degrees of coupling, and a lot of that depends on the responsiveness of the architecture, and how event-driven it needs to be, and how real-time, and lots of other things. So, I think that this is an opportunity for us with the interoperability of XML, and I think Eric's point is really excellent there. What XML has given us is this tremendous gift of potential interoperability that has been difficult to achieve with some of the older binary standards, and we can use that to create architectures that are appropriate for the enterprise. And to do that, there's going to be automation, but there also has to be architecture. You can't make the decision about how loosely coupled two services are using an automated tool. That needs the guidance of an architect and a designer. So it's a chance to really revisit some of the business applications and do them right.
Aaron, does that resonate with you there? For you, XML's a given. You're so young.
Yeah, well,
does that resonate with you?
That's been around since the dawn of time.
This long struggle that these gentlemen have been through on your behalf?
It's interesting. So XML, my background is sort of the computer science aspect of like strongly typed programming languages, and so I'm very zealous about it's got to be perfect and provable, et cetera, et cetera. And XML is actually, it really depends how you use it. Somewhere in between. We've seen some very sophisticated schemas and a lot of tools that take advantage of that to great effect. And putting out these giant contractual documents that specify what web service does is really it's a huge step forward in interoperability, because now it's day to day we see one platform talk to another.
You just jumped out and in the direction of the pet peeve of mine,
which is
huge giant contracts.
Monolithic
schemas.
So it's funny because here I am talking about the pragmatic path. So we've seen a lot of WSDLs that are one document that describe some simple service, and they do their job and they do it well. We've also seen contracts that are one WSDL and 37 schemas, which are 100 kilobytes each. So
100 kilobytes each. I might
not
agree with.
I can't say, but they're incredibly complex. Because when people are bringing their existing schema assets in and defining their services, which is great, reuse all this work you put in, reuse it now to define your services. It can get complex. But back to the original web service question, is it unfortunate? A little bit, because when the technology was young, searching on the term web services may have been difficult.
And awkward.
Slowed it down. But to the extent that email is a web application, or the internet itself, I don't think it's that big of a misnomer. Certainly, a lot of the services that are being deployed today are internal, not sort of external web-facing. But would you call a company's internet site a website? And if you would, I'm not sure why web service is wholly inappropriate.
Well, I have to just say, looking, just the nature and discussion about contracts has changed. I mean, initially we thought of contracts as a sort of IDL for the web services world. How do I invoke a service, and where do the parameters go if it's RPC or whatever? And really, we approached the idea of a contract very much the way we approached contracts and IDLs earlier on. But now I think the definition of a contract itself is starting to change, and we're looking seriously at extending that contract. What is a contract? Is a contract just how do I find this service, and how do I pass it parameters? What kind of schema it gets? Or is a contract also security policy? Is it also management policy? Is it quality of service? the truth is and this again goes back to, I think, Eric's excellent point about the expressiveness and interoperability of XML. It's giving us a chance to define what a contract is in semantically richer terms, which I think is going to help us create more effective applications. It's just the beginning of that.
Neutral terms too.
That's something we've been thinking about quite a bit at October. We have some of us have just been recently getting interested in the idea of OWL-S, which is a semantic technology for defining and putting some metadata around services, and the vista that opens up is actually pretty incredible when you think about it, to provide just the richness of logical structure, so you can make determinations conceivably. And it's a little bit Star Trekian to sort of say, well, I'll just sort of say what I want and magically something will come back and it'll be perfect. But at the end of the spectrum, you have that capability, and it's just an amazing concept.
Well, this whole thing about the contracts brings up another very important aspect that we see today, often, that we see in working with some of the early adopters of web services, especially a lot of the toolkits that you see out there today generate web services from Java or from a C# program. And we've seen in the industry over the years a fight for the hearts and minds of developers, Java or Microsoft, and that battle continues with respect to trying to emphasize Java and C# as the thing that you develop, the web service the thing you derive from it. But as Paul and David and Aaron have been saying, this contract is very important. How you express it is very important, and you can't just generate your web service from a collection of EJBs and C# classes and expect to get a benefit out of it. You have to think about things a little higher level. You have to think about things differently. You have to think about the contract. When we work with our customers, we emphasize the WSDL and the need to create that contract before you think about even the technology underneath it. And have the best way. Contract first. It's very important.
There's more to it than that, though, too. I mean, if your customers are actually using EJBs, in theory, they've already started down that road. They've said, okay, here's the domain I'm working within. Here's how the multiple domains, because I've never met an application that just sat within one domain. How do they fit together? What's the business interface or interfaces? What's the application interface? What's the network interface? What's the services interface? And it's really got to be a comprehensive whole.
Here's where, and not to turn this to you personally, but here's where we need more support in the tools for being able to define contracts and create the services a little bit better behind them, so that there's that not a direct dependency between the EJBs and the contract, where you have the flexibility.
Yeah, but there's also an issue with in a sense, the runtime environment. We've been focusing a lot on the development aspects of building an SOA, and that's entirely appropriate. But there are also the runtime aspects. I have a personal pet peeve, and my personal pet peeve is that traditionally we've thought of correctly administering the runtime environment of any distributed application, including those that exist in service-oriented architectures, as management and security. And there's also been an interest in IT governance, particularly from the development artifacts point of view. Are these XML artifacts being deployed appropriately and with appropriate authorization by a human manager or person in authority into production? So there's been these two worlds of development and runtime. And lately, we as an industry, because the word governance has become really hot, we've started to sort of misuse the concept of governance. It's almost an oxymoron. It's like jumbo shrimp or something like that. So now we have runtime governance, which to me is an oxymoron.
Okay, well, let's hold that thought. I love the notion of the shrimp analogy. Let's just ponder that for a little brief message, Paul. Oh, well, Paul's still wrestling with that whole jumbo shrimp thing. I can't even say it. I'm just going to throw it. There's way too much consensus here. I'm getting the sort of the eerie glow of consensus all around the room. So I just want to try and take a little litmus test to see if it's true that the SOA space is characterized by a fellow feeling and noble virtues. I know that there was a question asked there's the service-oriented architecture group on Yahoo. Of course. And the question came up, what are the basic principles of SOA? And that's what these groups are good for. So, as we're here, we may be talking to people asking that same question. But I thought one way to perhaps address it, to finish this power panel, would be to throw at you the way that one of our peers, J.P. Morgenthau, addressed this. He came up with 8 basic principles of SOA in response to this particular thread, and without getting bogged down, I just quickly mentioned that the first was loose coupling, that every service is atomic, so that was cool. The second one, JP says contracted. All services, we've been talking about that, are represented by contracts, described as inputs, outputs, access policies. Manageability, number 3, was that all services can be manageable, individually managed. Number 4, that they can be versioned. 5, discoverable. 6, addressable. 7, distributed. 8, point to point. We've got these in front of us. You haven't at home. But I wonder, are we all completely agree? Those 8 things? Let's sum it up, right?
I can relate this to jumbo shrimp.
Time out. We're not agreed? Where should we start?
Jumbo shrimp.
Oh.
Yeah, you left me hanging with that one, Jeremy. So,
I thought we were all going to be agreed.
Certainly JP's observation about the manageability of web services are very important. And that's really, I guess, where I was going to with the analogy. So thank you for letting me revisit that. This idea of runtime governance, or what I traditionally refer to as management and security, is incredibly important in a loosely coupled environment. Because there are a lot more points of failure. It's much harder to determine appropriate event correlation and do appropriate root cause analysis. And you've got lots and lots of platforms sitting there. Each platform, of course, considers itself to be the center of the universe. It's doing the web services thing it does, and it has its own individual manageability and security, much like a local police and fire department are quite appropriately addressing the needs of their local town, but you still need the federal and you need the state authorities as well. So one of the missing ingredients that JP so notably zeroed in on is this need for manageability, this need for, if you will, the federal perspective, something that rises above any individual platform or participant, as valuable as those platforms are, and says, okay, this is the state of your SOA. This is the state of your SOA in terms of security. This is the state of your SOA in terms of operations. I mean, I know I'm a CA guy, and CA is incredibly fixated on making security and management effective in these kind of environments. Yeah, I know, we're obsessed. But really, these are important challenges. And I see these challenges as being important in combination with, I was reading JP's definition, and he had a very, I'm looking here real fast, I think he had one, loose coupling, and he threw in loose coupling the idea of self-describing. And JP is absolutely right, but it's such an important concept, I'd almost relegate that to or promote that to a first-class object and say that the ability of services to express what their policies are so that runtime environments can effectively administer them is also a concern.
Eric, how close was he, JP, with his 8?
Well,
you have a different list?
Unfortunately, JP has mixed technology with design here, and we've been talking that earlier today how important it is to separate the design of SOA from anything technical. And he's mentioned things such as versioning, discoverability, addressable, which are all more technical than design aspects. Our experience over 7-8 years working with customers building SOA on Corba, and we have, I'd say, probably the largest SOA deployment today, which is Credit Suisse, well documented with 1,500 services, billion transactions a year. We find that you have to really separate out the design from the technology. SOA can be implemented with Corba, but with many other technologies. We've been talking today about the benefits web services bring, but it's still important to think about things differently, which is that this is a design, it's not technology. Therefore, things such as versioning, discoverability, addressability are at the technology layer and not the concept layer. At that layer, I'd say the one biggest thing he missed was the functionality of the service. This has to be the key design principle. What's the function of the service? Businesses and people provide functions or do things for each other. They provide services. That's what businesses do. And to think about a very simple analogy of a bank. The bank provides services to the customers for withdrawing things, depositing money, cashing checks, exchanging currency. These are the kinds of functions that have to be modeled in services, and after that come the technical considerations. So I'd say JP's list is good, but it's mixed technology with design, and it missed the most important element of design, which is the function of the service.
I'd actually like to, I wonder if I could, just throw out some comments and maybe hear other people's thoughts on number, I guess it was number 7 and maybe number 8, and the distribution of services, that they must cross machine boundaries. Strikes me as being a little bit dogmatic, right? Yeah.
Interfering with design.
And the other, the next one I think was point to point, that a service must use one and only one other.
That's downright wrong.
Partner. There's one incorrect one.
There's one incorrect one. It's number 8. In fact, if I could,
the consensus thing's creeping back in again. What's going on here?
I have to make a. You saw that as well. I mean, this idea of serialization. If I can read this, it's, and at any point in time, one consumer uses one and only one producer. I don't think that that's necessarily true at all. In fact, parallelism makes a lot of sense in a loosely coupled environment. And there are standards out there like DeepL that encourage at least a sort of pseudo parallelism. It makes no sense to me to sort of have a particular consumer gated and waiting from a response from a producer, if that's what's being said here. I think that in event-driven architectures and in the move towards, essentially service-oriented architectures that are more event-driven, that's a better way to put it, and that are more real-time, that's a unnecessary restriction. And again, it's not a design principle. I think Eric's point was well taken. That's not a design principle.
But it comes in the face of reuse too, if I can add that in. I mean, depending on how you put that in, I don't know why you'd even claim that they should only depend on one. The discussion about whether design is, it can be separated from technology, I guess it depends on what level of design you're talking about. So, if you're talking about the business functions that need to be performed, I suppose that most of these are probably too technical to merit discussion. But if we're already resolved to talk about service-oriented architecture, you're probably building this for some reason. So if I had to get in there, well, I mean,
probably.
Yeah. No, probably. I'm being loose with my words. You've already decided as a business function that you're going to replace or introduce. So you have some goal in mind. So are these somewhat technical? I suppose so. But if you're implementing a SOA with web services, there are absolute considerations that you need to have.
I think it's a matter of emphasis where you place it. I would say technology is very important, but the most important thing is the function.
But you can't accomplish a function without a well-designed technology.
Absolutely.
I have to go back to self-description for a minute too, because I think that I agree with Eric that the function is very compelling and a very important aspect. I think that what the self-description will allow us to do ultimately is to be more point-to-point as opposed to less two-tier. There's a lot of potential.
I'm going to work on this consensus thing.
Go on it.
I take argument with the idea of self-description as being necessarily coupled. Self-description is great, but how many services do you, of the billions of services there may be out there, right? Yeah. How many times do you canvass them to find out what they do? You go to a registry. Again, it's a management function.
No, I'm not saying that every service has to be responsible for its own description. When I mean by self-description, it could be proxied, of course. There could be an intermediary. There could be an aggregation. There are a lot of mechanisms, and there are a lot of standards out there that provide some form of description around aggregations of services. In fact, as an industry, we look a lot at UDDI, and that's a very important standard. But then again, look at something like Oasis Wisdom or something which has, relationships and an ability to, get some information, if you will, some semantic information about services, or at least the relationship between services in that standard as well. And then there are other standards like WS or specifications like WS Metadata Exchange. I think that in a real service-oriented environment, to make it, it's the pizza analogy. Sometimes I go to the Yellow Pages because I'm in a strange city and I need pizza, and so I need the directory, I need the repository to get me that address of that pizza place. But when I'm in my hometown, I know exactly what pizza place I want, and unfortunately I've called it too many times. So I do not have to use the phone book. I do not have to use the repository. I have a business relationship that's well understood, and I call that number and I get my pizza. I think that in real-world architectures there'll be a combination of both. And I don't think that a repository has to be the magical center of the universe in order for an SOA to be effectively and properly designed. It has a place, but it's not, necessarily a godlike place.
Eric, let's give you the final word.
Well, Jeremy, you brought up an interesting point earlier about consensus and agreement. And I find in doing conferences and talking with customers, and even today, I think we can see that we can all agree pretty well on the broad principles and concepts behind an SOA. Where we start to disagree is when we get down to the technology layer, and we will see today an emergence of various different technologies being proposed for SOA, and in particular we are working on the ESB approach, but other companies will provide different possible solutions for the SOA, and I think that's where we start to get into the disagreement in the industry. I think on the concepts and the principles we're all good. Just as a parting comment, I would say, from my perspective, I think that the industry today, people in the industry and IT environments, they have enough IT, to put it one way. They have enough features and functions to run the business, to do the job that they need to do. And what they need is this bit of service enablement that allows them to be tied together efficiently into new architectures and to be assembled more rapidly into applications, I guess, to use that word again, that fit the needs of the business much better than before.
Okay, so there we are, a closing thought really from Eric Newcomer, CTO of Ionis Technologies. Want to say thank you to you, Eric. Also, Paul Lipton from Computer Associates, David Kershaw from Altova, and Aaron White. Thank you for joining us for Mindbrief, and thank you for joining us on SYS-CON TV for this first ever Web Services Power Panel, clearly to be continued. Thank you again for watching.